Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy. You're very honest with our listeners last week that baseball's not really your thing. So let me ask, are you more likely to watch if there's guaranteed to be multiple home runs a game?
So I will say, yes, baseball is not my favorite. I do actually like to go to baseball games in person, though. So every time I'm on the road, I'm in a big city, especially LA. I always go to the Angels games. I've been to a few Dodgers games. I do like to go in person. As far as home runs, though, I think it's always more exciting, right? Like, you love to see those guys just jam it out of the park, and it's always cool when you see a big hit. A lot of the times where there's not home runs, I think the game can get a little bit boring, right? When you have guys that are bunting or doing whatever it is that, are not as big of a play, it's less exciting to watch.
Okay. And the reason I set up our next topic with that question is Major League Baseball broke the record for the single season home run mark again. So they broke it twice in a 3-year span with 6,173 home runs leading into play here on Friday, September 13th. Keep in mind, there's still 2 weeks left on this season. So the previous record that they broke was just set in 2017, as I mentioned. That was 6,105. In the last 4 years, 2016 through 2019, all 4 of those years are on the top 5 all-time home run list. So baseball's definitely doubled down, and it's led to a lot of interesting conspiracy theories in regards to this. So the main thing is, if you're not juicing the players, are you juicing the balls?
Yeah, so I've read some, sort of studies that they've done on this and changes in the balls. And people have found that, statistically, there is a slight difference between the balls prior to 2015 and then after 2015. And it's very small changes, like the material is slightly different. It's only 1 gram or something that the core of the baseball weighs less. But, it looks like things are definitely different. And I can't really see too much of another reasoning for why the balls, why there would be so many home runs. There is some, statistics that you can get into and analysis and stuff, but I could honestly see it. And at the same time, right, is the league has to do some stuff to boost ticket sales. So I know that there's sort of been a ticket slump when it comes to actual seats and going to stadiums, right? And I think home runs, if you can get more home runs, it's a good way to do it, especially in a sport like baseball, where a little kid gets to keep the ball after the game, right? So I think it's a good way to get people in the seats. So I think they might be juicing the balls. What do you think?
Kids are happy if they go home with a foul ball. Kids are stupid sometimes, let's be honest.
That's true.
But with that said, the main thing that's changed, so you mentioned 2015, we mentioned 2015 is kind of where this really took off. What was one of the biggest changes? One of the biggest changes I noticed in 2014, Rob Manfred replaced Bud Selig as the commissioner of Major League Baseball. Now, I wasn't the biggest Bud Selig fan. Full disclosure, too, I'm a San Francisco Giants fan. So naturally, I love Barry Bonds. And Bud Selig wasn't the biggest supporter of that. Although he was the commissioner during the steroid era, and he willingly let it happen for years, knowing that it was driving up his ratings, he was very vocal about himself not being too thrilled of Barry Bonds breaking Hank Aaron's home run record in 2007. He said it was unpleasant. It was the most miserable time of his life. He's a bit of a purist. Rob Manfred, on the other hand, is a bit of a businessman. And what drives business in the sport of baseball in particular? Those highlight plays, those home runs. And I think it's important, too, because with the rise of analytics, you've seen the value of a bunt really go out the door. With all these defensive shifts, it's really hard to hit it into the field of play for these batters. All the defenders basically know where they're going to hit the ball. So how do you beat a shift? You hit it over the shift. You hit it out of the park. And that's what a lot of players have basically doubled down on. Basically, every player has changed their swing to swing harder, which kind of sounds like a stupid concept. It's why haven't guys been swinging harder for years if that's the idea? But people have been doing that. They've been changing the angle of their swing to get more lift. Fly ball ratio is definitely one of the key statistics when it comes to baseball these days. And I don't know if the main thing is it working? Because I've kind of parsed the numbers and looked back at it. And so far, there's no evidence that it's really changing the ratings in a positive way. In the 80s and 90s, the World Series numbers, you would average about 20 million viewers per year, which is insane when you consider, here's the World Series numbers for the last few years. So in 2016, the Kansas City Royals versus New York Mets. That averaged about 8.6 million viewers per game, right? And then 2016, you had a bit of a spike, actually. So the Cubs versus the Cleveland Indians, 12.9 million viewers, which ain't too bad. And then in Game 7 of that series, they had 21.8. So their Game 7 was the most viewed World Series game since Game 7 in 2001 when the Diamondbacks faced the Yankees. Fast forward that a year, 2017, Houston versus the Dodgers, back down to 10.7. And here in 2018, it kind of bottomed out again at 8.3 between the Dodgers and the Red Sox. You can argue that was a bit of a terrible series. The Red Sox dominated all the way. But it's interesting to kind of like see, like, yeah, they changed up the game, but is it really having a positive effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. There's a lot of other things that are competing with baseball too, right? So you're starting to have basketball is doing really, really well right now for themselves. Like their ticket sales are always increasing. They're doing a good job. You got football, but now you sort of have the rise of MMA sort of taking off. And then you have a lot of other sports that are on like the ESPN threes and, you know, some of these more niche sports. And so I think there's a lot of competition right now in baseball, and it doesn't seem like it's working. Though I will say, I think it's at least worth a shot, right? To add anything that could be more entertainment value to sports and athletics, right? Always helps out. That's why I know that every commissioner in the world is going to tell you, oh, I don't like, you know, the bad guy, the villain. But a lot of people, like, they tune in to see the villains get beat, right? Like, we've talked a lot about Antonio Brown, and I don't want to bring him up again on another show, but people tune into him because they want to see what's happening and they want to see drama. And so if increasing home runs, right, is a way to add drama, or a way, you know, maybe not even drama, but excitement and entertainment value, I think it's always a good thing. But you're right, it doesn't seem like it's been working all that well. So maybe they have to find other ways to add to that entertainment value of baseball.
And maybe it's too early. I mean, if we're looking at these numbers right now, and we're only in the first 5 years of Rob Manfred as the commissioner, so we could see the net result of if it's going to impact the next generation. And baseball has a horrible reputation of always being behind the curve when it comes to making adjustments to improve the game. So they were the last sport to get in on instant replay. And then they always struggle with the time of games and everything like that. So you're seeing a lot of rule changes thrown out there, like cutting down on extra innings, the robot umps. A lot of are a bit contentious for people that are longtime baseball fans, and I understand why. But I won't commend baseball on certain things that they're doing to try and make the game more viewer-friendly, such as they're the first major sport to want to get on YouTube, which I think is huge, actually, because YouTube is a go-to place for a lot of people looking to just get quick content. So releasing a game a week on YouTube, I think that's a great idea for the sport. But it ultimately is tough. And I'll admit this, too, even as like a Giants fan. So when you're not on a team that's consistently winning, it's hard to like embrace your team in those dog days of summer. Mm-hmm. In high school, I used to watch like at least 120 baseball games in a year on average. Mm-hmm. But people have lives. It's impossible to sit down and literally watch all these games. Certainly go to these games, especially the ones in the middle of the week. You're not going to PNC Park on a Wednesday afternoon unless, I don't know, you're unemployed. But if you're unemployed, you're probably not buying the tickets either because they aren't cheap.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that is in those statements that you just made. So I guess going back to the rules, right? If you look at the rule books for like the major sports leagues, so the NBA has only 68 pages in their rule book. The NFL has 89 pages in their rule book, but the MLB has 184 pages in their rule book. So I think when it comes to baseball, one, it's sort of a non-traditional sport in that in most sports, right, if it's football, right, you're moving down the field and then you score, right, and then it's the other person's turn, they move down the field, they score. Same thing in soccer, right, you move down the field, you score, or you move down the other way, you score. Basketball, same. Whereas baseball, it is similar, right, but at the same time, it's a little bit more abstract, right, you're running around the bases and you sort of keep going until there's 3 outs, right? There is offense and defense, but it's not like your traditional offense and defense that we see in some of the other sports.
I would say one of the tougher things I've always kind of like mentioned at baseball, in particular at the youth levels, is with baseball, you do need a set amount of players. It's unlike basketball where you play one-on-one, soccer you play one-on-one, or even football 4-on-4, 7-on-7. Baseball, you pretty much need 9 guys or it's impossible to play. So it definitely does hurt the access to the game. Granted, you have seen it develop globally when you look at countries like Japan, the Dominican Republic, and everything like that. I think one of the greater jokes I've listened to in recent years is baseball is the most American sport because every year during the postseason, you'll see a bunch of Americans gather around their screen to watch 18 guys from the Dominican Republic play.
Well, so that's funny, and it's a good point. I think like some of the other things too that you sort of brought up and mentioned in your previous statement, or at least sort of touched on it, is there's a lot of games, like you said, right? So there's games literally every day of the week. And how many games is it in a baseball season? I know it's a ton, right? 160?
162.
162.
And then when you factor in certain things too, like obviously you have about 30 games in the spring training, which I love spring training. It's a great time. I like to go. But then you factor in the postseason, you have each of these series are going to take at least 3 to 4 games. Sometimes when each of these go into 7, sometimes they're playing all the way into like November, which is a bit of a strain on the season. When you talk about a season that begins all the way in March, doesn't finish until November, it's hard to keep people's attention spans, mostly because of the generation we're in. And mainly as millennials, keeping focus on certain subjects is not necessarily our strong suit. And when you talk about keeping focus on a baseball season for 162 games, that's where we falter as a generation, admittedly.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's why you see so many millennials and whatever generation is after us, X or Y or Z or whatever it is. That's why there's always switching jobs, right? So you have a lot of people that'll move jobs frequently just because it's like, hey, I want something new. And it's the same thing, I think, with baseball, like you said, is you start to lose that focus. You're excited for opening day or whatever it is, but then like you're halfway through the season, and especially when a season is 162 games, does anybody really care about game number 50 out of 162? Or even like if you get up to, game 81, you're only halfway through the season, right? And, whereas with these other sports, especially like if you look at football, that's only 16 games, right? Game 8, right? So you're 8 weeks in possibly, depending on buys and all that. Like that's pretty important. That's halfway through the season. Even basketball is a little bit more games, a little bit longer. But at game number, 41, right? Like that's important. That marks the halfway mark. But when you're almost 100 games in and you're barely halfway through the season, it is a little bit hard to stay focused.
And, too, I will counter like one thing you said is baseball's a non-traditional sport. It's the most traditional sport. That's always been one of its biggest problems in terms of being able to adapt. Everyone's a purist when it comes to baseball. Even I'll admit, like I'm a little bit more resistant. Granted, I have changed in recent years when it comes down to it because there are certain things like when they changed adding a pitch clock to kind of increase pace of play. I agreed with that change because I got tired of seeing guys step out of the box, adjust their batting gloves, kick around their bat a couple times, mess with the dirt. Why do we have to deal with this? And when it came to changing the amount of times you could visit the mound in the inning, as great as it is to see a great discussion on the mound, if it takes up longer than 5 minutes, I don't want to see it. It's a waste of time. Get rid of it.
Yeah, no. And so, okay, I guess I misspoke when I called it a non-traditional sport. I mean, non-traditional in, I guess, sort of the style of play, right? Like when it's basketball or football or soccer, you have one team that has control of the ball and they're moving downfield, right? And they're either successful or they're not. And then it's the other team is moving downfield or down court. Whereas baseball, it's still sort of that objective, but it's a little bit more abstract. So I guess maybe traditional is not the way to sort of phrase that. But I think you're exactly right. And the thing with when it comes to baseball is the amount of play, right? So it's a 3-hour long game usually. And really the ball is only in play for about 18 minutes of action during the game. Now, similarly, football is also 3 hours long, and there's only about 11 minutes of real action when you're not in a huddle or whatever it is, right? The ball is actually moving, somebody's rushing for yards or whatever it is. I think the thing, though, with baseball is there are some people that do get really excited when you make a really good double play or something like that. But football is a little bit more exciting in that, like, hey, at the end of most plays, I'm going to see you get trucked or get hit, right? Like, and that adds to the entertainment factor of I like to see people get tackled and get hit. Same thing with like hockey, right? A lot of people like to see them get in fights or get checked into the glass and all that. Whereas baseball, you can't really do that, right?
Yeah, and I definitely think too, like when we talk about just this rabbit hole of things that are hindering baseball in terms of its growth and its potential to reassert itself as one of the big three major sports in America, is the lack of star power. It's very noticeable out there. So you, as a non-baseball fan, I'm going to challenge you. Name me 5 players.
So I know Mike Trout for sure, mostly because I go to LA all the time, right? And if you're in Anaheim, you see his face everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, I know Manny Machado, who I don't even know if he still plays anymore, but Manny Machado.
I hope so. He's in his 20s and just signed
Okay.
a 12-year deal.
Shows you exactly how much I know about baseball. So don't ever listen to me really on baseball topics when it actually comes to baseball analysis, right? I can give you my thoughts on baseball as a whole, but actual baseball players, I don't really know. I know Aaron Judge because he was sort of big when he first got into the league. And then outside of that, I cannot tell you too many more.
Well, I'm not going to judge you too hard on that one. But, all right. So, yeah, so it's disappointing. Like, baseball needs to do a better job, too, in marketing out these guys so that the fringe viewers like yourself, the people that don't keep tabs on the game as much, have something to rally behind. And I'm not saying that they should sell out like the NBA has, like be a full player commitment league to where they're giving all the power to the players. But I do think that they need to strike a bit of a balance somewhere where they're giving these guys a little bit of character to be able to put them back out there. Because in the 90s, when you talk about Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, like these guys were everywhere. Derek Jeter in the 2000s. You couldn't turn on a TV without seeing Derek Jeter's face on ad. Right now, like some of the main guys in baseball aren't really featured as much. And it's disappointing when you have like literally the best player in baseball, Mike Trout. He doesn't want to be featured like a superstar should be. So I don't know. I mean, on the bright side, at least these guys aren't making attention for the wrong headlines, which is a plus. That's also hurt like the NFL in recent years.
Before we move off, I think that's a very good point. And I just want to say in baseball, a lot of times your star players are on really bad teams. And I think it's because it's just so much easier to pay guys that are fairly adequate when it comes to skill, right? Like you take a little bit of a hit in skill, but you save a lot when it comes to salaries, right? And so correct me if I'm wrong, Ju-Ju, but baseball is a no cap sport, right? So there's no salary cap. And so these owners have to decide, hey, how much do I really want to spend on these guys? And if you want all really good players, you can do that, but you got to pay a ridiculous amount of money. Whereas, hey, if I really want to win, right? So if I want to win a World Series, it's easier for me to get guys that are maybe not quite at the Mike Trout level. They're a step down, but they're just a whole lot cheaper and I can afford a whole lot of them. And so I think a lot of times when you have your really good teams or your really good player anyways, their team might not actually be that good. And so do you really want to see the best player in the world not make it to the playoffs in the postseason? Not really. Whereas with some of your other sports, right, like you can have a LeBron James or a Giannis or a Kawhi Leonard, and they'll take their team to the playoffs, and you have your best teams going into the postseason. Same thing, even a little bit in football, right? Is you can have your Tom Brady's, or you can have like an Aaron Rodgers even has a chance of pulling his team, into the postseason. A Drew Brees. You have some of those guys that are not only they have star power, but they have the ability just because of the way that the sport is and the way that the salary caps work, that they can pull their team into the postseason.
Well, I would say baseball is a unique mix of a bit of an individual sport while also being a team sport, one of the biggest team sports there is, in the sense that like when you're at bat, that's all you up there. And it's interesting because when you look at like wins above replacement and stats like that, the amount that some of these superstar players doesn't necessarily justify some of the contracts they have. And one day we'll have a bigger discussion when we could really look into it as far as like these contracts in baseball, because there haven't been a lot of 10-year deals that have really worked out. It's been one of the biggest things about baseball contracts as far in terms of players getting paid a year too late rather than a year too early, or 10-year deal 5 years too late sometimes. Yeah, that's interesting. But going back to the star power, so it's disappointing actually this week. So we did lose out on one of baseball's biggest stars this week. So Cristian Yelich, he actually had a fractured kneecap this week. So he fouled the ball off his knee, which just sounds like a miserable injury altogether. He was on pace to be the runaway MVP this year. He won the MVP in 2018. He was probably going to smash 50 home runs and also turn 30 stolen bases. So it tells you the kind of year this guy was having. Right now, the Brewers sit tied with the Cubs for the last spot in the playoffs. So it's going to be interesting to see how that team goes the rest of the way, if they can pull it together without their superstar.